You're watching Screenview.
Hello and welcome everyone to Screenview. This is Peter Van, your host, and with me I have JD Church and John DeLuna. And this week we are talking about Thor, which is officially the #1 movie in the box office this weekend. It pulled in the next one is Fast 5 at $32.5 million. And then a couple other ones, Jumping the Broom, Something Borrowed. I don't know any of these. And Rio, rounding out the top 5. No, I'm just kidding. I know them, I just don't really care. But so here our theme today is Thor, as I have previously said. So I guess we can talk about it being pretty much the opening blockbuster of the summer from Marvel Studios. This is going to be one of the 2 big Marvel movie pushes for this summer.
Two big ones and one sort of yeah.
A little extra for your effort.
There's an X-Men that comes out in a couple weeks, but everybody's like, oh yeah.
But that's like, oh yeah, that's right.
Like zero hype.
I did see that. I did see that in the trailer, didn't I?
Yeah.
And you probably didn't react like the rest of the audience.
Well, you have your 2 Marvel Studio ones, and then this is technically a Marvel film that's a Fox. But
yeah. The X-Men First Class is a 20th Century Fox film. While Captain America, the second Marvel Studios film, is July.
Yeah, for some reason, not the 4th of July weekend, because that would make sense.
Well, that would be coinciding with Transformers: Dark of the Moon, and I don't. They are not going to risk that. Although, why they would do that with Harry Potter as well? Part 2 coming out.
Yeah,
in July as well. So that's going to be a huge month.
It's a packed summer, kids. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, there's no good, or bad weekend really this summer. So,
okay. So for those that are, interested, we are going to be talking about Thor and our impressions and everything. But we can start off with just Thor in general. In the film is pretty much we open up with a big Thor, the son of Odin, as well as his brother Loki, and pretty much he just does something really reckless, which pretty much starts a war from after hundreds of years or years of peace with another world, and he is pretty much banished by Odin, who is played by Anthony Hopkins. I guess Thor is played by Chris Hemsworth, who you may know as George Kirk from Star Trek, who died in the first 5 minutes.
Like 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, I mean that's the only guy. That's the only thing I know from the guy. So
the guy that flew the Kelvin into the big Romulan ship at the beginning of the movie. Yeah, that guy.
And pretty much, but he's an Australian actor. If you have seen him in other things, then good for you. So Thor is pretty much he does something that's very bad, and he gets banished to Earth by Odin, who's, as I said, played by Anthony Hopkins, and he pretty much is stripped of all of his powers and his the awesomeness of humanity. He has to gain that war and fighting is not always the answer, and how to pretty much be relatable and actually like people and things like that. And then he has to work towards, once obviously he's going to get his powers back, he's obviously going to redeem himself and everything, but then he has to fight a bigger battle, which I guess is his it's a bigger power. It's a dangerous villain of his world, and then he has to go fight it.
So basically it's a hero story. I mean, cut and dry hero story.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as that goes.
Hero / origin story.
Yeah. Story that needs to have something packed in there.
Right, and it's got. As far as the story goes, it's sort of a parallel development of Thor becoming a true hero, and then Loki sort of becoming a villain as well. So
yeah,
you've kind of got those two stories going going in parallel, because at the beginning of the film, Thor is this large, robust, flamboyant, smile, point, nod, wave at everybody, very much like Tony Stark was at the beginning of Iron Man. And Loki is this sort of behind the scenes, talk to people, sort of, just sort of try to pull the strings and mess with things. By the end of the film, Thor is very much the leader type. He's very strong and has that moving towards being very wise, and now Loki goes full into that villain role. And so that's essentially what you're seeing in terms of progression of the film. There's a little bit of a love interest with Natalie Portman's attempt at portraying Jane Foster. We've got the Ice Giants.
She tries.
I think we could talk about how that felt very forced, and I know there needs to be something that needs to progress him and an object of his affection, so he can learn to love these Earthlings and get more of a human side of him. Yeah. But I feel like while Natalie Portman, as an actress in general, she's always been relatively good. Other than we'll forget about that Star Wars thing, but other than that, the past. She's been doing well. She's been doing a lot of films that a lot of people have critically praised her for.
Black Swan.
Right, Black Swan. There's another one, like It's Just Sex or something like that. And
yeah, but it's not Friends with Benefits, but it's along that line.
Huh. Yeah. Nice.
That one.
Chick flick.
Yeah.
That other film, the comedy.
Okay. She's done a bunch of stuff.
She's a working girl. She
been
likes to
out
work.
A lot of films, and she's been well known for her acting capabilities.
Yeah, she's got chops, and she's developing them as we go.
But I don't know how
she's the name for the film, but
but I don't know how she does in terms of how she's portrayed here versus the comics or anything. But I feel like that line was very forced. The two of them didn't really have like a.
They had to have the heroes. They had to have that hero's journey. In order to have the hero's journey, you have to have, the heroine, so to speak. You have to have the damsel, if you will. And that's the role that Jane Foster had played for a long time in the comic. That's the role that was played here. I thought it was a writing issue. I didn't have so much of a problem with Portman's performance, but I think from a writing standpoint, that character just wasn't written very terribly. And I think that's really about all there is to say about that character. To be honest, she didn't really do much. She didn't really drive the story very much, other than just being a focus for Thor's development as a hero, giving him something to sacrifice himself for.
Yeah.
But
there's that, and then there's the thing for, Thor obviously has to come back, love Earth, and come back.
How he's going to do that, I don't know.
Reason to come back.
But we'll get back. I guess we ought to. Do you want to? Anyway, I kind of took over the synopsis, but that's essentially the story. Where do you want to go as far as?
I guess. Well, yeah, I guess we could talk about your overall impressions. I guess we can start, JD. We can start with your impressions to see what you like.
Well, and of course, I'm kind of the comic book guy, I guess, as far as that goes. I liked it. There were a lot of things that connected well to the Marvel Universe itself. There were several things. There were opportunities, but as far as the way that the world is set up, how Odin works, Thor, Loki, how those characters interact with each other, I thought it was very well done in that respect. The Loki character is just spot on. It doesn't get better than the way that character moved and developed through the course of the film. I thought that they were able to ride that line between, the problem that we had talked about, or some of us had talked about as far as getting into the Marvel world, is that when you're talking about going into Avengers and bringing Thor into the mix, that's a very mystical element to bring into what had been established with like Iron Man, where this is very much a real world, a tech world, so to speak, and even the other Marvel films like Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, or even X-Men. So I think by pushing that boundary and saying, well, they're not necessarily gods, but they're just really, really advanced aliens with this really, really advanced tech and able to move through parts of the universe. I thought that ended up working fairly well, and I think it felt like those characters could easily fit into the established Marvel universe, and I wasn't going to be pulled out of it. But like I said, overall, and the only other comment I'll say is that I went and saw it in IMAX 3D, which was stunning, absolutely beautiful. No, it was amazing. I was a little bit leery going in because I had got my IMAX tickets, and the only option for the time I went was IMAX 3D, and I was like, eee. But
well,
no.
That's surprising because the film was shot neither in IMAX nor in 3D.
No, but but the IMAX 3D version I thought was really beautiful. It was really crisp, really nice. Even with Avatar, when I went and saw Avatar, I even had a little bit of like motion sickness, but none of that, watching Thor. It really, however, even doing that in post, it looked really good. So
cool.
That's my thought.
Thank you. John, what about you?
Real quickly on the 3D thing, apparently this movie is much easier to see in 3D than a 2D theater. It's apparently kind of hard to find it in 2D. And so that may be one of the reasons people have kind of postulated that may be one of the reasons that it grossed 66 million, and it may have grossed a little bit more if there were more 2D screens available. So it's kind of an interesting balancing issue with the 3D movies. I'm sure you'll expect more of that as we go, as we get crazier and crazier into 3D. As far as the movie itself goes, I should say I saw it. Well, a little background. So I'm not huge into comics, but I am very much aware of DC and Marvel characters as they are presented in other media, so animation, video games, and as they're interpreted by other writers and other creators in media outside of comics proper, the source material. So, I can't really measure it against, like I said, the source material, but as far as, the archetypes of the characters and kind of the characters as I have come to understand them, I liked it. I thought they were portrayed well. In hindsight, I think Thor and Loki by the end of the film came off as much richer and deeper characters than I expected them to be. So, by the end of the movie, they had gone through some conflicts. They weren't these paper-thin, kind of shallow characters that they easily could have been. So when I see them again in future films, I'll have a much better appreciation for these characters. They'll come across as like real characters that have gone through some struggles and some development, which is saying a lot for a comic book movie. As far as like the overall experience, I would probably give it like a B plus, maybe. I didn't walk out with a sense of awe or a sense of like that was an outstanding or exceptional comic book movie for me, but I did come out thoroughly entertained and thoroughly, satisfied. And I thought it was very good. I thought the writing was very good. I enjoyed the bits of humor. I thought it played really well. The audience I was with really enjoyed the humorous bits when Thor is kind of stumbling around Earth. And I thought that balanced out well against the kind of the raw, 300 action scenes and things like that. So there was a good balance there. And I did, to JD's point, I did appreciate the attempt to kind of balance the mystical with the science. And I liked that even though they portrayed these two worlds in the same universe, technically they're in the same universe, but they kept them very separate. So there wasn't a whole lot of like crossover. It was very clearly defined. We're going to spend some time in the fantasy, or the kind of the outlandish bits of Asgard. And interacting with the frost giants and things like that, and then we're going to come back to Earth, and these worlds are in the same universe, but we're not going to cross over to the point where it looks ridiculous or absurd. So they kind of struck a good balance of again with the future movies. I can palate that, I can stomach that, and I can accept that somewhere there are these quote unquote gods, aliens, whatever they are, and then back on Earth there's like this Avenger event happening. So I think they've done a good job at this point building up the kind of the complete Marvel universe. And so, I mean, overall, I think it's a solid 2 thumbs up. Do I think it's one of the best comic book movies I've ever seen? Maybe not, but it's certainly up there. And I could not point out like a flaw to the movie. I think everything is done at least well with this movie.
Okay. All right, thanks. Well, JD, just go back real quick since John gave it a B+. If you gave it a grade, what would you give it?
Oh, I'm not much on grading systems, but I don't know. I mean, say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it a 2 thumbs up. I don't know. I mean, it's on
a scale of 17 to 25, what would you
right or something? Maybe B+ to A-. I mean, I felt like. I mean, like I said, I think there were plenty of nods to the comic book nerds. I thought that at least on the outside, it seemed like an approachable film to watch. Like, I didn't feel like they really got too deep into the mythos for elements that they didn't explain. So I don't think that there was anything that, if you didn't know anything about Thor or anything about the Marvel Universe, I think you could go into the film and watch it and still feel like you got everything that you needed to without having to have a lot of exposition in order to get there, which I think is important for a film. There's nothing worse than walking into a film, especially of this caliber, where there's this much mythos and this much depth, and then to have everything explained to you to go in so that you get it. But in this, there were nice things like, for example, a good example would be like when Loki ends up, like, if you know the universe, you know that Loki is a frost giant, or is at least a half frost giant. Well, they don't bother to they explain that organically as a part of the story. They don't have to like tell you that in exposition. They make that clear as the story goes on. And there was even a moment like when the frost giant grabbed Loki and it didn't hurt his arm, it just changed it. And my wife said something, I actually said, well, he's half frost giant. Well, I didn't even need to do that because later they explained that. And I thought that that's the way the rest of the story developed. Like it went organically. That's a good thing, I think. So that's why I say overall, I think, B+ to A-. Probably A- for me as a comic book fan. I'm probably a B+ if I were to say that I was just a general viewer. So.
Well, I mean, you guys are definitely a little higher than, general critics, but, that's a little different. But 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, I think, 78% is still a really great
for critics.
So. And for critics, it's a great score. Overall, a lot of critics have liked it a lot. So I'm actually in between the two of you in terms of familiarity of Thor. I am definitely not a Thor comic book reader, but I definitely read comic books and get a lot of my Thor interactions, mainly only through the Avengers storylines. So I don't read the actual Thor comic books or anything like that. So I don't about Thor in general. So I think they did a really great job in the short amount of time explaining the origin and where he comes from, how it came about, and the frost giant battle. They set that up quite quickly and quite well. The only thing that I kind of felt weird about was right in the beginning when they, when they ran him over with their crazy looking Jeep truck thing. And then when it cut back, I felt like it kind of slowed things down really, really by a lot. It slowed it down by a lot. So, but then I feel like it kind of
It's interesting that you say that, and because I had that same discussion with my wife, because she kind of said the same thing. My point on that was, and I mean, at least the way I thought about it is that think about it the other way around. Think about if the movie had started with the Asgard elements and that nothing about Thor whatsoever.
Right.
So instantly in the beginning of the film, instead of being introduced to a world that you know and understand, like people in a Jeep or even though they're scientists or whatever, and you have that whole moment, because then Because here's what they could have done, right? They could have gone right into the Asgard deal and then, had him being thrown out. Then you cut to the scene of them in the Jeep and you know what's coming from the sky or whatever. And then Thor comes down, they run him over or whatever. But by having that little bit of an intro and then going back and telling the Asgard story, you as the audience have asked the question, what was that? Where did that come from? So then the director is taking you back and saying, this is what happened. Yeah. I think, and I may be wrong. Like I said, my wife disagreed, and you may disagree still as well. But I think that allows the audience a gateway into the more complicated elements of the story without throwing it at them initially.
Right.
And
that was going to be my point, is that it redeemed itself afterwards. I thought about it afterwards because usually I wouldn't think about it. I thought about it as I was driving home, and I thought about it, and I was like, okay, well that definitely makes sense how they did it, because you're right. If they start out with Asgard, people are like, did I walk into the right movie? At first, it's kind of like, you saw a lot of Earth.
Yeah, you may lose half the audience there.
Yeah. They go right to see, because it's not a world that they're used to. It's not something they can get into.
Yeah.
They're going to feel like they're Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. People didn't walk into a fantasy movie is not what they expected, right? Because they see Natalie Portman in the trailers. They see a lot of the Earth elements. So you're right. I definitely thought about it, and I agreed that the way that the director cut it, or it was written and directed, that it cut to Earth first and then it cut back to Asgard. It's well done. It's the only way that it could have been done.
It's the smart way to play it, and it's not the typical way to play it. And I think that that's what's important. I think that most story writers and most directors would have done it the other way around. I think they would have started with the Asgard story and then just focused on him. But I think it kind of helped establish that Jane Foster is in some ways your POV character, that character that you can attach to. And even though that she wasn't extremely well written, that was her function nonetheless. So...
Right.
And I should say, like, the director, to their credit, they found a director, Kenneth Branagh, who has experience with Shakespeare. And so that's a very similar subject that the general audience may find hard to get into. And so there was probably a good understanding of, the things on Asgard, you have to treat carefully, and you kind of have to get a rolling start for the audience and kind of introduce it to them slowly. You can't throw Shakespeare at a general audience, or their eyes will glaze over. They, they're like, what are these people? What are they talking about? Like, what are these words that I'm hearing? And so Asgard was kind of like that. And so there's a good understanding of that. And actually, you could see kind of Kenneth Branagh's Shakespearean experience, and certainly in the way he kind of directed Anthony Hopkins and the way he directed the Asgard scenes. It was very Shakespearean and very loud and kind of boisterous, and I think it really helped the movie.
And it definitely, you're right, and it got them, got the people who were looking for action. The first thing is, bam, he gets hit by that car, and they're like, whoa, what just happened? And they kind of like, to get them already engaged, like, all right, well, start off with a car, somebody getting hit by a car, and that's how it's going to start out. Then, maybe I'll wait for another like 10, 15 minutes and see how this goes. So, unlike you guys, I didn't see it in IMAX nor 3D. I actually, without even thinking about it, I found I just went to the 2D. I didn't have any issues finding 2D, but the people I spoke to did have issues. So, like you, the first show was IMAX 3D, which is smart in their part. Obviously, IMAX and 3D or both is going to make you the most money. And that's, not necessarily what many people would agree with, but it's a business. So we can't disagree with that. The film was, I think, well received with the people that I went with. The humor definitely landed, pretty much. Like, all the jokes that they made were pretty obvious, and it was well done. Everybody understood it. Everybody liked it. Overall, the cast was well directed. It was well acted. It was well done. And actually, I think, I don't know about you guys, but I was very bizarrely just drawn to the fact that all the SHIELD agents drove Acura ZDXs, which is...
Well, yeah, there was
Did you see the commercial? Like, Acura is running commercials day and night now.
Yeah.
But they are the official car of Thor.
Yeah, the official car of Thor, which is very... it's obviously very logical that a government organization would drive a Japanese car, but
Yeah, well,
and an
'cause you
ugly,
wouldn't expect it, right?
right, an ugly car at that. But anyway,
Right.
that's
They
for
paid a
another.
lot of money to be in the movie.
Oh.
But but as far as the story went, I mean, I think that like I said, I think that flow worked. I mean, especially the Loki story. Holy hell! I mean, just talking
I think you
about
see his progression from loving brother to just just glorified, just madness and thinking that, pretty much he's gotten to that point where he says, this is what I'm doing and it's all for the greater good. But once he finds out that it has turned against him, he just kind of, it looks like he gives up on him. But, if you follow most Marvel Studios films, you wait till the end and they kind of explain how he just dives deeper and deeper into that madness that he is.
yeah.
See, and it's just saw him as he got darker and darker, just the way his persona changed, and it was just.
Yeah, I mean Loki. If you're not familiar with Loki as a character, both the mythological and both in the Marvel universe, Loki's role is the trickster. I mean, he loves nothing more than disrupting the status quo. He in the mythology, I mean, he's always tied at the hip to Thor, always doing things to screw with Thor or to try to get him, to egg him on to do things. And the actor's portrayal, I can't remember his name right now, but the actor's portrayal for that character is just spot on perfect.
It's Tom Hiddleston.
Tom Hiddleston, thank you. The initial, that initial moment, like when the Frost Giant, in the beginning of the film, the Frost Giants show up when Thor is supposed to be crowned, like the day of his crowning or whatever. And, Loki mentions later that he's the one that let them in. And initially, his plan was just to sort of mess with Thor's big day, to just sort of cause a ruckus. He knew that the Frost Giants wouldn't get very far and it wouldn't be a very big deal. But he just kind of wanted to mess with things. And then he just kept pushing it because, there Thor is upset and he's sitting there talking to him. That wonderful moment where he's sitting there talking to Thor on the steps, early in the film. And he says to Thor, he's like, well, the only thing that you could do is defy your father's will. And then he's like, oh, no, don't do that. No, that would be, so it's just...
And you can see the cunning in his eyes. You can just see
but
it.
it's like for no other reason, though, to be mischievous. Even though it's like threatening his own well-being. Because if he ends up going with Thor and they go to Jotunheim,
which they did, yeah.
Which they did, and then, he could be killed there as well, or could be injured or whatever. So, even things that are sort of detrimental to his own health, but that is what ultimately leads to everything else. It's his discovery that he's actually a frost giant, and that that I think one of the interesting things with Loki is that he sees himself as the trickster, upsetting the balance, playing with them, and then he comes to that realization that he has been lied to his whole life, that he was lied to, that he was tricked, and that's a wonderful switch within that character because you can just see the sort of rage at being the one that was fooled and just can't handle that. And that really, unfolds the rest of the story for that character and all the moves that he makes. And just continually, all the way up to the end of the film, like he kills the Frost Giant King and he even turns to his mother and starts lying to her as though he's still going to get away with it. Brilliant. Just absolutely brilliant. So, Thor was kind of interesting too, but Loki was really great.
he was definitely like a shining part of. The Thor, he's the hero. He is the the alpha dog, I guess. He's the guy who will always prevail regardless of what happens. He will figure out a way. But just to see the way they set it up for Loki to possibly come back. And how he continues his mischievous ways, is definitely a way to catalyst towards the what will obviously be the Avengers.
Right. Well, and speaking of the Avengers, there were several things in this film that tied to not only existing pieces of the Marvel Universe, but also tied into the incoming pieces of the Marvel Universe. So, for example, Eric Larson, the scientist, at one point is talking how he had a friend in gamma research, and then one day that guy just disappeared. Well, I think the implication is that that's most likely Bruce Banner. You had Agent Coulson, is that his name?
Yeah, Clark Gregg, played by Clark Gregg, who finally got a big spot in a Marvel film.
Yeah, lots of time, lots of screen time.
Yeah, and he did well. So
I thought so. And again,
character.
He's he was in the first two Iron Man movies. Obviously a bigger role in the second than the first, and then now had a much bigger role in this. I like him as a SHIELD agent too. I think he makes a great character,
and he's actually quite versatile. I saw him in the SHIELD, and he was a serial killer / raper.
Oh, nice!
That's completely opposite. And when I saw him, I completely forgot about that. I thought, he is a SHIELD agent. He runs this branch of SHIELD. So I think he's definitely a well-deserved push at a top spot for a Marvel.
Yeah. But then there were also elements that were tying to the upcoming elements. One of those being Hawkeye. And I don't know if y'all are as familiar, but when you have the scene when Thor is breaking into trying to get to the hammer, and they said they need an eye in the sky, that's referring to Hawkeye. He grabs a bow instead of a gun, and
you see that as he he's like, not a gun, I'm gonna go for the bow instead.
Yeah, goes for the bow. Totally Hawkeye. And as McFeely pointed out, I mean, even with the few lines of dialogue that he had, I mean, definitely established himself as Hawkeye. As he's up there, he's watching, he's like, you want me to take this shot or not? I'm starting to root for this guy.
Hey, man.
Yeah.
Good
so, I thought that was a nice job. And then, of course, we have to mention the end credits scene.
Yes, as with all Avengers universe movies.
Yep.
You should stay for the whole
all the way
show.
to the end.
Always. Don't leave.
So Eric Larson, again, the scientist, is invited into the SHIELD installation, and he has a small exchange with Nick Fury about technology and mysticism and science and whatever, and relics, and
his future at SHIELD.
Right, his future at SHIELD. And Nick Fury takes him over to a case, opens up the case, and inside the case is the Cosmic Cube, which is a huge MacGuffin within the Marvel Universe, heavily tied to Red Skull and AIM and other elements of the Marvel Universe. So, from my understanding, that is directly tying into Captain America. That's supposed to come up in the Captain America film.
Right.
So we'll be seeing that in there as well. And it also established Loki's sort of return. I mean, at the very end of the film, you see Loki sort of fall off of Bifrost. But he mentioned earlier in the film that there's other ways to move through the realms. So I don't think there's any implication that he would have died there. But he does seem to be sort of puppeteering Larson at this point, and is definitely setting himself up as the villain, which I think had been already noted that he's going to be the villain for the full-on Avengers film, which is now shooting that's coming out next year.
Yes.
So
yeah. So and I guess this will be a continuing thing, right? I mean, Iron Man 2 was obviously a setup for the Avengers, all in its whole. As so is Thor. At the end, his line with Agent Coulson, you can count me as an ally, which is
that seemed really forced. That was probably one of the more.
There's no reason to say that.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the main complaints that I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but as with every other origin story that we can seem to get, is they had to, unfortunately, but they had to force the origin story, the love, the villain, the climax, the fight, the big fight, and the setup. So that's a lot of elements that they need to fit into a film like this. And I think the film was about an hour and 15 minutes, a little under 2 hours. parts of it was definitely the pace. It was fast, but at the same time, it just felt rushed at the same time.
Yeah, and quick. Like the whole movie, like God, that went by really quick. To that point.
Never
I was going to say real quick, JD. Sorry, it's an origin story, but okay. So when we walked out of the theater, I had a weird feeling about this movie. And I had a weird feeling about Iron Man 2 to a lesser extent. That even though these are origin movies, being aware that these movies are building to the Avengers, it also makes it a bridge movie too. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like I kind of had this weird feeling going out of it. You know, I watched an origin movie. Technically, this was an origin movie, but by the end, with that last scene, I felt like I just watched a bridge movie, and it was both. Yeah. And so like it's almost hard to just like walk out of it and just appreciate what I just saw, because it just gave me a taste of the next film. So now I'm waiting for the next film. So it's hard to just kind of enjoy this for what it is.
You felt like you were being sold an unfinished product.
Well, like you're being led on.
I don't know that it felt unfinished, but I'll agree that it felt like it was piece of the story. I mean, the thing for me is that, you know, in the Marvel Universe, you have characters that really can stand on their own, and you have characters that really work well on a team. Iron Man's one of those characters that does both. I mean, he can work well on a team, but he also has obviously, I mean, as far as comic book sales and things, has done very well on his own. Thor as well, but I don't think that Thor has this sort of dedicated following, whereas he's much more prominent and I think much more interesting on a team because he's very much a fish out of water. You know, he's sort of a god working in this modern world. And even though he's very powerful, he's still, you know, trying to understand the culture and trying to understand the world and everything. So I think that Thor works really well in a team movie. I think the thing for me out of this is I didn't get to the end of this movie and feel like I wanted to see another Thor movie. I left the film ready to see him on an Avengers movie.
Okay.
Which I think is a good thing as far as the direction that they're going. When I got out of Iron Man 1, I was ready for Iron Man 2. You know, in that respect. Now, I would have been appreciated a better Iron Man 2, but you know, I mean, Iron Man 2 was what it was. But I didn't leave that, you know, and even into Iron Man 3, I wouldn't mind Iron Man 2, I wouldn't mind an Iron Man 3. But leaving Thor, I don't feel the need to see another just Thor movie. I feel like Thor is now established. Now I want to see Thor working with the Avengers and doing that. I don't care about necessarily seeing his individual story unless they find some way to do it in an interesting and different way. Otherwise, I'll just take Thor on the Avengers and that'll be fun. Yeah. So,
and I think the reason that, you know, Iron Man was definitely not a setup for Iron Man, for the Avengers was, I mean, the Avengers as an idea was just a twinkle in Marvel Studios' eyes at that point. You know, they were just that was definitely the first for the movie business as Marvel Studios. So they were just, you know, tempting their way. Now they're just going full out. So, and I can understand what you're saying about Thor. You know, you get the idea, like, why, you know, what would they do in Thor 2? Because in Thor, you know, in Iron Man, they definitely said, you know, the movie ends with him saying, "I am Iron Man."
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean that's simple.
Oh yeah, that's a standalone.
How he's affected by that, right? And it's like, oh, how does this, you know, how does his revelation of personal life, everything? And in Thor, it was like, you know, okay, well, I'm stuck here. We'll obviously find, you know, the gatekeeper says we'll find a way for you to get back to Earth, and they'll figure it out. And it's pretty hinted at that he'll eventually get there. It's pretty obvious. So, yeah, you're right. There's like not much of a okay, so what now kind of feeling anymore. It's like, okay, well, he's coming for the Avengers, which is most people already do know. And if you didn't know, it just says Thor will be back in the Avengers.
I think though that Marvel Studios did a better job with Thor than they did with Iron Man 2 as far as the world, because the problem that Favreau had and the reason that he's not doing Iron Man 3 is because really the Avengers elements in Iron Man 2 were so forced and so prominent. I mean, he got forced to. They had to use Black Widow for that film. Coulson showing up, all the stuff with Nick Fury again. I mean, there was a heavy Avenger overtone that was really forced into Iron Man 2. Whereas with Thor, you had the taste that you needed. I mean, S.H.I.E.L.D. showing up, like we talked about Hawkeye and that kind of thing, and then leading into Captain America with the Cosmic Cube element at the end. But I didn't feel like it was so heavy-handed, and I think that made me feel more confident about it. It really felt like with Iron Man 2, it was like, yes, we are definitely going to do this Avengers movie, and we've got to shove all these Avengers elements into it. Whereas this was like, yeah, it's coming, so we'll give you, just a little taste. So I thought that was a lot better than what they did with Iron Man 2. Even though, like I said, just that one little line was like, you can count on me. I'm like, yeah, okay. Give you a call.
It's like, good, you already signed the contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely like a timing issue and things like that on the Iron Man 2 part.
Yeah, I think in that there was almost like they were trying to really establish like we really want to do this.
And they really wanted to. And they really wanted to establish Iron Man, Tony Stark, as the head of the Avengers. So they really needed to push that a bit more. Thor is like, you can count me in as an ally, but he can come in later. He can come in, swing his hammer and beat the crap out of everybody. But Iron Man needs to be there from the start. So they needed to set that piece up, I think, at first. Yeah. They need to fit that shield component into Iron Man 2, and that's pretty much what started mucking it up a little bit.
Yeah, it was just force.
And I guess we could talk. I think that a natural progression, I suppose, since what did you guys think of visually how they represented this? Thor as a character, Asgard, and those things in particular.
Well, in terms of the costuming, holy cow! I mean, those were just. Somewhere Jack Kirby was crying because those. I mean, in a good way, because those costumes were just so Jack Kirby. I mean, they were very, the very grandiose sort of, Jack Kirby style helmets and costumes and, Odin, Thor, Loki, even for the Warriors 3 and Sif. I mean, I thought, just from a costuming standpoint, it was spot on. Visually, I mean, as far as like character portrayals and just the way they moved and worked, yeah. And I mean, in particular, like just side elements like Volstagg, like the way Volstagg carried himself and worked. I mean, that character, brilliant. Absolutely loved that element of it. And just visually for Asgard, wow. I mean. The way that they established it, I mean, its placement in the universe, its size, the mechanics of how it worked, just the look of Bifrost even was just damned cool. That sort of, I mean, because there are essentially two pieces to Bifrost, which isn't usually, it's not necessarily the way it works in the comic, but I mean, as far as Bifrost goes, you have, you had that like sort of Rainbow Bridge looking piece, and then you had the actual like gun portal to the other realms piece of it. And that was the part that was maybe too much tech and not enough mysticism, so to speak, but it was still visually really interesting, and really powerful. I think it did what it's supposed to in the sense that it let you know who those characters were just through their costuming and just through, those sort of elements. So, yeah, I mean, visually, it was really an interesting film. I mean, other than the New Mexico stuff was kind of meh. I mean, it was sort of indescript, small New Mexico town and a lot of desert.
It was New Mexico. I mean, that's pretty much what New Mexico is.
Yeah, so accurate.
No, it's very accurate. It was
not interesting.
It was also shot on location in New Mexico, so they definitely captured it very nicely.
Yeah, it was. I guess it was easy to capture New Mexico in that respect. Shot.
Yeah.
New Mexico.
Just get a wide lens and take in all that sand.
Oh man.
Yes. Yes. So visually for me, I liked it. I mean, I thought it was good, especially everything in Asgard. I think it all fit. It was all believable. I bought it. Like the only time I had any kind of hint of goofiness. Oh, by the way they played the costumes in the real world with the New Mexicans kind of pointing and gawking and kind of gaping.
Yeah,
was awesome.
Robin Hood.
So which is awesome because I mean, it's impossible to put those costumes in New Mexico and make them not a little absurd, but to play that off is awesome and was smart. The only time I had like a small bit of like, oh hey, that's a costume, was just when Thor got his hammer back and just the initial few seconds of him kind of running around with his big red cape. It looked a little costumey, but I mean, obviously I got over that real quick. Otherwise, I mean, I think it follows Marvel Studios kind of aesthetic for their costumes, and it all kind of fits, and it's all just outlandish enough to buy in the real world. It's certainly I've seen. Let's put it this way: I've seen in DC comic movies way worse, like way dumber costumes, and Marvel characters are way more outlandish and outrageous in nature than DC Comics characters. So, I think they've done a really good job with it, and like I said, I was distracted for maybe half a second by the costumes, but otherwise, I think they've found a really good place to play in putting these superheroes in real life. And I'll say, after seeing the Captain America trailer before this movie, it looks like Captain America is going to be the same case, where it's got this really good feel. And Captain America is a character that could really look dumb if you don't do it right.
Absolutely.
But it looks like he is going to come across in real life in a very flattering way as well. So, I think Marvel's good at what they do, and they did it again with this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you two guys make some really great points. It's pretty much in line with what I was thinking. There was actually an interview that the guys had with I saw online somewhere. It was a video interview, and they said pretty much that the costumes were just so well done that when the actors put them on, they just felt like they were God. All they had to do was just deliver their lines, and it would figure it out. Like, just that the way they put them on.
I'm sure the actors would disagree, but
well, no, that's exactly what the actor, one of the actors said. I think it was Tom Hiddleston that said, when Anthony Hopkins put his costume on, you're like, okay, he's a god. There's no way, there's no thinking otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that I don't know if you guys know. There's a director that's famous in China, Zhang Yimou. He does a lot of these films that are just beautiful. They're very radiant. They're very colorful. They're very expressive. And I think that was whenever they went on Asgard, all the gods and the clothing that they wore, it was very well done. It's like you wouldn't think these guys to be anything but gods. Mm-hmm. And the way that the magic and science are one and the same. The way they introduced Asgard and everything was like floating, but at the same time, it didn't look absurd. It looked like it was perfectly just the way it's supposed to be. This is exactly what it's supposed to do. So, costume me. I think that one of the things is that Thor really did well was that they didn't try to take itself too seriously. So, when they did the Jackie Chan, Xena, and Robin Hood joke, they really poked fun at themselves, saying, hey, we know these are costumes, but, just go with it. And these guys are definitely not from this world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. And, you bring up Anthony Hopkins. I should say I was thoroughly impressed, and I really appreciated his performance.
Even though he slept 3/4 of the time.
He slept 3/4 of the time.
But he was still badass, though.
Well.
No, he's so badass, Like,
he's certainly at an age where he could just collect a paycheck. Hello, Liam Neeson. But he didn't. He did in this movie. He seemed to kind of get into it and ham it up in a good way, and I thought it came across really well. So I was glad, and I was glad to see, like a legendary actor. I'm always glad to see like legendary actors kind of dip their toe in movies like this and take it seriously, kind of get into the role, and I think he did,
and not overshadow everything else that actually exists there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like oh, cool, it's Anthony Hopkins. But at the same time, you're not thinking, oh, when's Anthony Hopkins going to show up again? You thought,
right.
And I'll truthfully, I did not. I didn't do enough research on my way in. I actually did not notice it was Anthony Hopkins because they just masked him that well that it was. Obviously, I'm not sure why I didn't notice from his like insanely the way he just conveys his words and
he was really shaggy. So
yeah,
hair.
He's definitely clear.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, he had, and McFeely pointed out like just some of the great moments that he had. I mean, one of the things about like Odin is that he sort of moves through a lot of different personas. I mean, he can be that aggressive type when he needs to be, or thoughtful when he needs to be, or whatever. And he had like all of those moments throughout the course of the film, which is a credit to Anthony Hopkins' portrayal. And I mean, even just like the one moment where, Thor makes a comment about, he's arguing with him and he's like, well, when I'm king, and he's like, but you're not. And you're just like, oh, I mean, I'm like sitting in the audience, like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
It's like, whoo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all props to Anthony Hopkins for pulling off a great performance. I mean, the nice thing about Odin is that he's sort of an archetype character. And that's why I think one thing that Branagh was able to play with is that a lot of these characters were, in a sense, archetypes. And I think that that's what helps translate them to an audience that may not know about them. Because you can be familiar with the archetype, but not necessarily have to be familiar with that particular character. So you don't have to develop Odin a lot. You just have to say, well, he's the head of the gods,
Mm-hmm.
And that tells you what you need to know. So
and he did a good job supporting that theory, that idea. So, okay. So, do you guys have any last JD? Any last words?
No, I mean, I think I said, pretty much what I wanted to say in the sense that I really loved the movie. I mean, I would go see it again, but I'm not like itching to go see it again, which I guess says something. But I'm definitely ready for like the next movie. Like, I think that ending got me set up, and I'm ready to go see Captain America now, and then go in to see the Avengers. So, but solid individual movie on its own. I'll definitely be getting it like on Blu-ray when it comes out. Put it that way. So,
John?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it was a good movie. I would say if you haven't seen the movie and you have any natural interest for whatever reason to see this movie, it's definitely recommended. So if you're curious, or if you're kind of interested in Marvel, or if you're kind of like this borderline Thor fan or whatever, or if you just want like good background going into the Avengers or even Captain America, I would definitely see it. It's definitely a good movie, solid movie all around. I will say that I went to see it with my wife, and we were in a very mixed crowd of ages and geek and non-geek.
Yeah.
And I think the crowd really loved it, and she liked the movie probably more than I did, actually. So I think it's definitely a good date movie. You don't have to be into Thor to enjoy it.
The ladies love Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
He will make you feel inadequate.
Yeah, wonderful.
If you're a guy, you will watch that and you will definitely feel inadequate.
Had 3
I
months.
never want to meet this guy in person ever. Like, no offense to him.
I mean, if you had 3 months.
No. I mean, I would just say say it's a good movie. Go see it if you have any interest at all.
I think if you have 3 months of doing nothing but eat, sleep, and work out, I'm pretty sure you could probably.
Yeah, and like 3 personal trainers and
trainers. But I think that's a great point, John. That I was skeptical walking in. I am not a huge Thor fan. Like I said, I have minimal exposure to him, and I got him. I thought that even like down to him when I saw the trailers of him throwing the hammer, I was like, man, this is gonna look stupid, but it was well done. A fan of how they what Darcy would call meow meow. For his hammer, which is Mjolnir, and the way the visuals for that was just really well done. So I definitely a convert. If you were a little skeptical, but you're just looking, Thor it caters to all facets of people. It's definitely an action flick. So if you just want to go sit down for a popcorn flick, then definitely this is it. I mean, this is one of the films, and this opens up the summer blockbuster. And it converted me to actually liking this film, thinking that this film was quite a good one among the Marvel universe, which should be expected. You know, Marvel's been doing a great job. The track record's been pretty good for a new studio. So, yeah, I think we all give it some good 2 thumbs up out of 10.
Yeah, 1 out of 10. I'd say definitely 2 thumbs up.
So,
I mean,
I guess that's it for now. Until next time, I have JD and John, and thanks for watching.
You've been watching Screenview. Visit us at tfradio.net for show notes and to subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on Twitter at tfradio for news and updates. Watch our live stream at tfradio.net/live. Join our Facebook fan page at facebook.com/tfradio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, TF Radio Network. Have a question or comment? Leave it on our Facebook fan page or mail it to contact@tfradio.net. Screenview is a Radio Free Cybertron production. Copyright 2011, Radio Free Cybertron.